Sam, are you able to share the deck?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm just starting up the live stream and then. All right, so we should be good there.
Aren't you kidnapping my name?
All right, there we go. You guys see that?
Yes.
Okay.
You want to put it in slideshow mode?
Yeah.
Easier.
All right. So the time is 6:06. This is the December 8th Board of Zoning Appeals public workshop, public meeting, and public hearing. Here's what we have for the agenda today. One item for the workshop at 82 Euclid Avenue, an interpretation for the meeting, area variance for 185 Henry Johnson Boulevard, and for the hearing, an area variance for 1053 Broadway. For the first item, we have 82 Euclid Avenue. This site is zoned R1L, and we're looking for an interpretation from the board of the term grade as it applies to retaining walls. The proposal here is construction of a retaining wall that exceeds 4 feet in height forward of the front wall plane of the building. So here are the provisions of the code that were used by the chief planning official to make the determination. So we're looking for an interpretation, or the applicant is looking for an interpretation of the word grade, and whether or not in the general standards for walls and fences that would apply to a retaining wall. Here are the existing conditions. This is just a screenshot from Google Maps. I haven't been able to make it over there, but to my understanding, there is some work that has already been done. And here's a rendering of the proposal. So it would be a walkway to a basement door with a retaining wall here and a guardrail on top. It was determined by the chief planning official that grade would be measured from the surface of the walkway, not from the yard. So that is the reason that this was brought forward, was for the board to make an interpretation as to where grade would be measured from. And here's a diagram of what is being proposed. And I believe, yep, that's all we have for this one.
The reason that the chief planning official is asking for an interpretation of from where we believe grade should be measured is because this fence would be slightly more than 2 feet taller than the allowable fence for this zone.
Right. It wouldn't be, or it would be more than 60% opaque.
Okay.
And this is not a retaining wall by necessity, right, Sam?
I'm not 100% sure. So this isn't a driveway. This would be a walkway to go to this basement door here. So we confirmed that there would be no curb cut, that this wouldn't be used for parking or anything like that. So I'm not entirely sure in terms of like the engineering of it, whether or not this retaining wall here would, be needed to hold the yard back. Yeah.
Isn't the basement door new? Isn't that part of the construction also, Sam?
Yeah, because this is what it looked like before.
Okay.
Yeah, it would appear the basement door is being constructed below the grade of the current grade of the yard, necessitating regrading the yard or removing some of the yard in order to make that portion of the building accessible.
And the chief planning officer is proposing to measure grade from the sidewalk?
Correct.
Whereas the applicant is saying it should be from the rest of the yard.
Basically from where the front of the house meets the yard.
Where the front of the house meets the yard. Huh.
Could you ask the applicant to give us a rationale for, other than it works, for why they're measuring it from the front of the house as opposed to the middle of the retaining wall or the sidewalk?
Yep, we can ask the applicant for that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the board that we would like the applicants to answer?
Just as a matter of education, what the city does when it's reviewing applications for a retaining wall, as far as are there any limits in height or the construction requirements? I think that would help bolster the application as far as the necessities for a retaining wall. And it appears, since the fence is one of the triggers for the review, just some additional material in the application as to the necessity or decision to have the fence be there and that size before we make any assumptions about the fence on top of the wall.
Yep, we can get all that.
So because, wait, Martin, you're asking this because the black fence in the drawing we're looking at right now, basically, so the wall that's underneath the actual retaining wall, that would not trigger an interpretation, like that does not require any variance, or like that is proper size. It's only the black fence part that
and I may be wrong, but that's my reading of it. The trigger for the variance request is necessitated by the fence on top of the retaining wall.
So we don't define retaining wall in our code. So this was just the provision used by the chief planning official was for a regular wall or fence, and that would, with grade being measured from the sidewalk.
And that I understand, given you don't want somebody building a 6-foot wall in front of their house. It doesn't, it's against the legislative intent of our code. But yeah, since we don't define retaining wall, this is a unique case. So thanks.
So just to follow up on Martin's question, if the fence on top of the retaining wall was removed, would there need to be this interpretation?
I believe that that's there for safety. So it may be required as a part of the building code, but we can confirm.
Yeah, if you could please confirm whether removing the black fence on top would get rid of the need for a variance or for this interpretation of the variance, that would be useful. The wall that is blocking the water from the backyard going into the basement, and I say it that way because when I went and looked at this project, it was a period of heavy rain, and so there was a nice little lake forming in that ramp that they have there. Is that wall also, the retaining wall in the back, is that tall enough to violate the fence rule?
It doesn't appear to be, but that was not part of the plans that were submitted.
Okay, could you
so we
can
can
submit that too, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, from the drawing, it's not obvious, but Richard, you're saying the wall that's on the other side of the door that's facing the sidewalk, basically, that's parallel to the sidewalk. There's a wall there. Is that?
Was that there before they dug out this ramp into the basement?
Doesn't appear that it was, but it doesn't appear to be forward of the front wall plane of the building. So then they would be allowed 6 feet if it's behind the front wall plane.
Okay.
And judging by the door, that's not 6 feet. But a measurement was good to add to the application.
Does the planning department have any other cases where it has determined what grade was for the measurement of a fence?
Nothing that I can think of offhand, but we can go through our records.
Okay. Does the board have any more questions?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate one of the questions earlier, I'd be curious about, again, the like black fencing atop, because it is on those, you know, the retaining wall, I guess we're calling it here in the front yard, but why isn't it on that back perpendicular one? If it's a safety issue, I guess would be my question. Like what differentiates, like why it's not there as well?
We can get those things from the applicant.
Okay. And if the planning department wants to opine on that also, that would be useful too.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, if the chief planning officer or you or Palumi want to write a memo to the board about what you think, or I'm sorry, whether or not you think there should be a fence on the back wall, or if you have a rationale for where grade should be measured from, that would be useful also.
Okay, we can put that together.
Okay.
So Richard,
Okay.
I have a question based on that. So our code doesn't have a definition for retaining wall, and that enters into this conversation. Do we need to talk in that memo about retaining walls and like in that sense? Like we need all these definitions to come to a reasonable decision.
Potentially. Could you ask Brad to address that in his memo also, please, Sam and Palumi?
Yep, we will.
I think if we just call it a fence, all right, let me back out of that. I think the rationale for the applicant calling it a retaining wall would be to attempt to mitigate some of the self-caused harm concept, because they've created a situation where they arguably need a wall to hold back the rest of the grading in front of the house. If we just call it a fence, then it's just something that's over height potentially. So that might be their argument to make too. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it's peculiar how this might intersect with a fence project that would be on a naturally sloping front lawn, where the fence by the home, which would be considerably higher in this example from the sidewalk, would be significantly more than 6 feet.
Yeah, we did see a case of that nature maybe about 2 years ago, Martin. I think you remember this one. It was the fence was up on a hill and the land sloped away from the front of the property. And their argument was that it may be 6 feet tall, but it's not standing 6 feet. I don't think they used grade, but they said it's not 6 feet high when you're standing in the backyard, which is on the other side of the grade. Okay. All right, if you can ask the applicant and Brad to address the board's questions, that would be useful. And I think this will be an interesting presentation.
Sounds good. For the next item, we have for the public meeting would be 18500 Johnson Boulevard, and this would be requesting an area variance for relief from required parking. So the project requires 26 total spaces, where the required the required spaces would be 26, and being proposed is 3 off street and 4 on street. So this one we have had on workshop. So we have the applicant here to speak, to kind of go through the presentation of some of the concerns outlined by the board in the last meeting that the applicant has addressed.
I think Dan is in the attendees, so
Yep.
you can unmute him.
So Dan, you should be able to talk now.
I can speak, yes.
All right.
Thank you very much. Daniel Hirschberg from Hirschberg and Hirschberg, representing Roy's Caribbean Restaurant. Our position here is that we are asking for a variance from the parking requirement for a situation in an area where typical of other places on where areas exist, like on Lark Street, Upper Madison Avenue, some places on Central Avenue, there's just not off-street parking available or spaces for off-street parking available, where a variance is requested since at the existing restaurant, on-street parking is utilized, and they would intend to continue to use that even though they're increasing the size of the restaurant to provide some banquet facilities. The shortage of parking is 19 spaces. If you go to the next slide, it just shows the area. This just shows the area. The photo shows a vertical photo. The building right across the street from it is 200 Henry Johnson Boulevard. So this is right across the street from the planning department's headquarters. And the parking lot to the rear of the 200 Henry Johnson Boulevard has signs on it that permits residents to park there overnight. And I think a permit's required for that. And the applicant does have apartments on the facility. They would apply for that capability, which would reduce the amount of parking we're asking for a variance. If you go to the next slide, I'd like to walk through some of the issues that were raised. These just show the parking tables and how it was arrived at that the 19 parking spaces is the deficiency. Next. This again shows the parking tables. It shows how it was arrived. We took a credit for shared parking and proximity to transportation. And so consequently, it worked out that the 19 parking spots is deficiency. Next. Some requests for additional information was made in an email. By the way, I thought I had forwarded an updated PowerPoint. This is from an earlier PowerPoint. I don't mind going through this, but I forwarded an updated PowerPoint that answers some questions that were asked also. I don't know whether or not you have the latest one. But they want a comparison of existing building. The existing building has an area of 2,934 square feet, and the proposed building has 9,847, which is an equivalent of, which is equal to increased residential area and increased restaurant area. The existing is two two-bedroom units and a total of 5 two-bedroom units and 1 bedroom unit. And one bedroom unit will be in the existing facility. Next. Utilization of planning and APD parking. The applicant proposed to make use of the parking behind 200 Henry Johnson Boulevard for residential units. This would reduce the shortfall to 14 parking spaces. And the applicant proposed to designate one spot near the building entrance on 3rd Street that will require approval by the supervisor of traffic engineering as a handicap space. That's done on other places where there's need for handicap space, and we do have a handicap accessible interest on 3rd Street. Next. There shows where we request that handicap spot. And I don't know whether or not there's anything else in this particular PowerPoint. Okay. Okay, there were another question raised was impact on the environment. So we took the impact on the water use, which is there. It's a minor impact on the water use, 0.026% of the production of the city of Albany. It's not a significant amount, and those estimates are based upon New York State DEC approved rates for sewer generation, and they tend to be conservative. Next. On sewage use, the concern here, we're in this combined sewer overflow area. So we figured out how much sewer is generated, and then we're detaining stormwater through use of a blue roof on a new addition. We also have a pipe gallery to store some stormwater, and we're cleaning the stormwater through a hydrodynamic separator. And whereas the requirements would be to retain up to 4 times the average daily sanitary flow, we're actually detaining 8.57 times. So we're well exceeding the requirement under the combined sewer overflow portion of USDO. And it only utilizes less than 1% of the capacity of the local combined sewer, which is the sewer on 3rd Street. Next, if we have another one. I don't know what else we have. Okay, the question was, where will people park? We made up this plan that shows parking within 2 blocks of the facility, and we didn't count the spaces along Henry Johnson Boulevard or any spaces available on Livingston Avenue. We counted on 3rd Street and one cross street at the top, and we stopped 500 feet from the entrance. And we ended up with 62 parking spaces available. Those obviously have to be shared with residents of the area, but we think that our proportion of need for it is only about 20% of that 62, our 14 parking spot shortfall. There are plenty of restaurants in the area that require non-street parking. Comes to mind up on Madison Avenue, or the Points, Juniors, Kismet, Cafe Madison, and Madison Poorhouse, which all pretty much rely on on-street parking. There's a small amount of parking to the rear of one of those facilities. I think it's the Point, but everything else requires on-street parking. There are a number of places along Lark Street which have no parking facilities, and they use on-street parking. So it's not unusual to count on on-street parking, even in residential areas, to make up your parking demand. Therefore, our assumption is that this is not, although numerically it sounds like a significant variance, we don't think it's significant in the context of how restaurants in the city provide parking in many, many areas. And I think that's the last slide on this set.
Yeah, that's the last one.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the board?
I guess I'll jump in while the people are formulating their questions. In the workshop, we had asked if the applicant had considered shared parking arrangements with other lot owners around the property in similar fashion to what has been done across the street. So I'm curious if there's been any efforts made on the applicant's behalf to arrange for shared parking to alleviate
the major parking that adjoins us is the city parking lot. The Albany Police Department has control of the parking lot to the rear of us, which actually we're acquiring a small portion of that to allow space for our addition and to get access to the rear of the building so we can have a dumpster. And we believe that's the maximum amount of parking that the Albany Police Department is willing to give up in their facility. And the only other parking space would have been in the shopping center on the corner of Livingston and Henry Johnson Boulevard. I don't know that they're approachable for that. It's changed hand recently. I don't think there would be a good mix there to have shared parking. Number one, we can't offer anything back. We only have 3 on-site parking spots, so the share would strictly be one way. And the only other place that we went diagonally across to Stewart's has really very little parking for the volume of traffic that goes in there. So we don't think that shared parking with anybody close to us within our convenient parking area is good, although we would like to take advantage of the parking behind 200 Henry Johnson Boulevard.
Henry Johnson is the building across the street. Is that correct?
That's the building you normally have your meetings in, right across there.
And yeah, and so that building, is there capacity in that lot, or has there been any effort made to secure parking at that facility for the restaurant?
No, because the other limitations pretty much, I think, are residents in the area are allowed to apply for permits to park behind the building. And I'm not so sure how that would work, being that when you have evening meetings at 200 Henry Johnson Boulevard, if you have a very exciting item on the agenda theoretically, when the pandemic restrictions expire, you have plenty of times where that parking lot gets very full. So I don't, if the city wanted to grant us some shared parking back there, we certainly accept it. But I don't think practically there's very much on there. The outside line closest to Third is actually normally has some parking for residents there, and that's taken up pretty well. And the 2 lines, actually 3 more lines of parking and some parking up against the building. And I visually have seen it when we had items on the agenda that encouraged a lot of people to come out and speak. That parking lot is pretty much fully utilized. So it might be amenable, and if the city wanted to offer a shared parking there behind it, we'd certainly consider it. But I don't think from a practical standpoint, there's very much to share in there, especially since meetings at 6 or 7 in the evening would coincide with the peak hours for the restaurant. So from a timeshare standpoint, we can't take full advantage of that.
Are there any further questions from the board? Hearing none. Do we have any members of the public who are interested in speaking for or against this project?
Just on that point, this project was not up for a public hearing for today's meeting. So it was just the applicant who would be taking you through the project. The public hearing for this is scheduled for the next meeting in January. So that'll be January 12th.
Thank you.
And we posted signs to that effect at the Caribbean restaurant, Roy's Caribbean restaurant. We've posted those signs today in both windows facing Third and Henry Johnson Boulevard. So public will know about it, and it's January 12th. So hopefully we'll get public comments at the time. We have received some letters of support, which I passed on, including one today. That should be part of the file. We have pretty good public support for this restaurant and for their capability of expanding their facility. Thank you.
Yes, there are 2 letters that we've received, which are on public record. So they've been uploaded on the website. And thank you, Dan, for postings. We will send you the details of the next meeting.
Do we know if all these other, you gave some different examples of different restaurants on Lark Street and Madison Avenue that also rely on street parking. Do we know if any of them were granted any variance or?
A number of those were built and occupied well before the USDO came into effect, and I'm not sure what the off-street parking requirement was for restaurants of a certain size at that time. I wasn't involved in permitting any of those projects on Madison Avenue or Lark, so I'm not really sure whether or not a variance was applied.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschberg. Sam and Palumi, if you could find out what the parking requirements were for those other projects, or I guess more accurately, any restaurant and or banquet facility under the old zoning. I don't think there have been that many in the areas that Mr. Hirschberg referred to in the last 5 or 10 years that have come along.
We'll check on that and get back to you.
Thank you. Okay. Any further questions from the board, or we will move on to the next case. Thank you, Mr. Hirschberg.
Thank you.
So the next agenda item is for Druthers. Sam, you can go to the next slide. So the agenda for this is more a rehearing of this project, which is a request for area variance to allow for a deck in the public right of way. And prior to having the applicants, go through this project, we just wanted to go over some of the comments that we'd received on this project from different city departments. So Sam, if you can go on to the next one. So this was a comment from the Albany Fire Department, where they highlighted that the main gas was connected to the building and had to be moved for access. And also the size of the Bridge Street would not allow any parking on either side. Sam, the next one. This was comments that were received from the traffic and engineering. They were concerned about limiting the line of sight for vehicles as well as for pedestrians, and a deviation from the 20-foot width of the street, which was actually not allowed. So they wanted to make sure that those comments were registered. We also received comments from the Albany Planning Board, the County Planning Board, and they were concerned about the accessibility parking. So that we forgot to include that in this deck, but I just wanted to let you know. So Sam, if you go on to the next slide. Oh no, we did include it. So they were concerned about the relocation of the handicap parking. So yeah, these were the three key comments that I wanted to incorporate prior to having the applicant take you through the project. So Sam, go on to the next slide. And I think, I'm not sure if Chris wanted to speak. If you can just raise your hand, so we will unmute you. Okay. Sam, I think we have Chris.
Should be good now.
I'll
Yep.
just note that for the Albany County Planning Board comments, although they did make comments the first time around in June, the matter has been re-referred to the Albany County Planning Board because of the rehearing.
Thank you, Council.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Actually, do you want me to? Okay, I guess I don't have the video option, but thank you once again for giving me time to present this project. As was mentioned, we are essentially looking to build a 13-foot wide, 110-foot long deck in the public right of way. To give you a little sense of the neighborhood, we are in the mixed-use form-based warehouse, which is essentially a mixture of retail, industrial, various commercial businesses. We are located, our neighbors include to the west, we've got Surpass Chemical. To the south, we've got National Grid. And on the other side of Broadway from us, which would be north, we've got some metal working shops. We opened this location in 2015 and have been there ever since. Could you go to the next slide, please? So this is, just a existing condition giving you a sense of the front of our building. And I'll mention this now, and I think it might be worth mentioning this again throughout the proposal. But what you see right now is the staircase, the front of our building on Bridge Street, and the staircase that provides access into our building. Right now, our staircase, the width of that staircase is 12 feet. The width of the planter boxes below our staircase are approximately 36 inches. So right now you're seeing that come out about 15 feet right there. Then you can see what remains, that there's a small curb that kicks out about 2 feet from those planters. That's where the edge of the sidewalk would be. And I'll get into exactly what we're proposing to do here, but I just wanted to give you a sense. I know that in the last comment, or in the last, while we were going through comments, I think traffic and engineering indicated we were proposing to narrow the street, and we're not. What we're doing is just picking up the existing sidewalk that runs from Broadway, turns onto Bridge Street, and then would connect down here. We'd obviously replace this curb, but that's going to be the location of the curb. Next slide, please. And you can see in the first picture on the left, that is the sidewalk that comes from Broadway, connects with Broadway, and starts coming down Bridge Street. When we purchased the building, this was the condition of the sidewalk. It just sort of ended. It kind of maybe 20, 30 feet into our building. We're just looking to bring that sidewalk all the way down to the other edge of our property, and our deck would be, the proposed deck would be on the building side, obviously, of this sidewalk. Next slide, please. So you can see that this is essentially an overview or our site plan. It's difficult to see, at least it is on my screen, but this is the length of the area. What we're looking for in an easement is really, we're not going, you can see that the entire outline of our building here. The deck is, a lot of the deck is in gray, but you can see that there's where it ends, and there's staircases running on the western side and the north, to the north a bit. So just to answer another question here, you can, hopefully you can make this out, but where the staircase ends coming off the deck closest to Broadway, and then you'll see that there's a retaining wall, like a very small retaining wall, as you walk closer to, if you were to go down the stairs and walk closer to Broadway. That space is a little over 45 feet and a little over 22 feet wide. So 45 feet long, 22 feet wide. Now, we don't get deliveries from trucks that are bigger than, certainly not, they're not greater than 8 feet wide, 10 feet wide. It could be a maximum, but our trucks that are making deliveries here are under 40 feet universally. So the idea is, we also have a curb cut in that area. So the idea is that if this deck were to be constructed, our delivery trucks would pull into that alcove, if you will. So they're not blocking the sidewalk, they're not blocking Bridge Street, but they have a little access point right there. I just noticed that also came up on, I believe, the traffic report, so I wanted to point that out. But that right there is generally an overview of what we're proposing to do with the deck. Again, 13 feet wide, 110 feet long. Next slide, please. Okay. Well, this is just a definition of the porch. I don't think I really need to go into that. Next slide, please. Okay, and these are the elements that I'd like to walk you through. Next slide, please. Okay. So if we're looking at our neighborhood when we're trying to determine whether whether our proposal to build a 13-foot wide, 110-foot long deck would cause an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties, would be created by a variance being created to allow us to move forward. So when I look at this, I looked at the status quo. What's the current situation that we're dealing with? And then I looked at being a mixed-use form-based warehouse district. What does that mean? What are the goals of the neighborhood? What are we supposed to be accomplishing here? And so I'll give you the status quo quickly. Status quo is when we moved in 2015, we have parking along the front of Druthers. And if you could go back to slide 5, please. So, oh, sorry. Right there. So what we have going on is these are all, you can kind of see the handicap parking sign underneath the second window from the left. What folks do here, and there's a car actually parked at the far end of our building. Cars pull head in to these spaces right here, and they park along the entire building. There are also some legal parking spots on the other side of Bridge Street, and cars will park horizontally along those areas. When things get busier, some folks tend to park not only legally, but illegally. So we might have a distance of 10 feet where you've got cars parked, going on the horizontal following the line of Bridge Street. And there might be another 10-foot block where, for a variety of reasons, the city has decided that parking doesn't work there. It's probably to permit a certain number of trucks to pass and so on and so forth. But what would happen is the cars that were pulling in headfirst into the Druthers spots along the building were narrowing Bridge Street by 2 or 3 feet. And then you've got cars parked along the other side of Bridge Street, also narrowing the street by the width of a car, say 4 feet, 5 feet. So the street would get fairly, what was a wide street becomes more and more narrow as the parking continued. You had Surpass bringing down industrial trucks down the street, and parking issues began arising as we got busier and busier. Parking became not only illegal, but in certain cases, parking near railroad spots, across railroad tracks, it became dangerous. So what we tried to do throughout the years, we've looked at buying other lots around us to provide for off-street parking. We haven't had any luck. We've always wanted to add outdoor space because it was an item that I thought would enhance the experience at Druthers. In March 2020, when the pandemic hit and indoor dining was shut down, what started out as kind of we'd like to have outdoor dining became we must have outdoor dining. I mean, we're going on 2 years in this pandemic, and we're still in Albany 25 to 30% under revenue pre-pandemic. Our locations in Saratoga and Schenectady, both of which have outdoor seating, have returned to pre-pandemic levels. So it's the kind of thing where I'm not sure that we have a viable business going forward without outdoor seating. It's just that there is a decent sized portion of the population that just isn't interested in eating indoors. So that's kind of why we're here. So the status quo is we are operating next to an industrial use. We certainly don't have compatible uses. So what we were trying to do is come up with a solution that gets us outdoor seating and really addresses with some finality the safety issues that are presented by us customers parking on Bridge Street, reducing the width of Bridge Street, and not giving Surpass adequate room to get through. So we sat down and we said, what if we got rid of all of our parking? So we proposed we would get rid of all of the parking spots on Bridge Street. We approached the traffic engineering department and said, we'd like to remove all parking from our side, and we'd love for you to, paint the entire other side red. We can put big signs up that indicate no Druthers parking, tow away zone, so on and so forth. So we thought and at the same time, we reached out to the one of the metal shops across the street. They have a lot that holds about 70 cars. We arranged for a lease of these parking spaces. So we now have 75 off-street parking spaces, and we've gotten rid of, say, 35, 40 parking spaces that would have been on Bridge Street. That's what we were proposing to do. The idea being that now all of our customers would be coming from Broadway because there's no parking on Bridge Street. They would have, if they're coming, they would have the ability to walk down. We're also including that 180-foot sidewalk on the Druther side. So the idea is that pedestrians would now be walking on a sidewalk to access Druthers. There's a crosswalk across at the intersection of Broadway and Bridge Street. We would think that to the folks who are parking in the lease spots, they'd go across a crosswalk and they'd essentially visit Druthers by virtue of taking that sidewalk, going up the stairs and entering the building. As it is right now, when cars are parked up with head in to Druthers, there is no sidewalk. So if you're walking down Bridge Street to get to Druthers under the status quo, the pedestrian is most likely walking in the street. So when we put this plan together, I thought, man, the easiest way to solve this is just to give up our parking and pay someone nearby to use their parking. And that's what we've done. And we've reached out to National Grid. We've tried to buy 1043 Broadway, which is on the other side of us. We've reached out to U-Haul. They're restoring the Argus Lithgow building, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to get some parking, off-street parking there as well. But our entire idea was, let's fix two problems at once. We've got a safety issue, we've got an outdoor dining issue. That's what we tried to do to go forward. Now, that's our neighborhood. We've got a bunch of industrial uses. So if I look at the MUFW, and the ordinance provides that the purpose of the mixed-use form-based warehouse district is to allow for a greater variety of building reuse and encourage the redevelopment of the warehouse district into a walkable urban mixed-use center containing residential, retail, commercial, and entertainment uses, while protecting the continued viability of the existing industrial uses that are included in and surround that area. So if we look at what the criteria says for number one, it's whether this deck that we're putting on, this variance, is going to be a detriment to nearby properties. So I don't think that people would suggest that, hey, if we put this deck on, the Surpass property is really going to take a dive in property value, or National Grid is really going to see their operations suffer, or not operations suffer, but their property value decline. So I think if you look at the MUFW, like what the ordinance provides is that while we're making this warehouse district into this walkable urban mixed-use center, what are we doing to the viability of the industrial uses that are around us? And I look at this and I think to myself, I look at the letters that I've received or that are public record now, submitted on behalf of Surpass by their counsel. And in the first letter in June, I believe it was June 23rd, there is nothing, mostly the complaints involve parking issues and how poorly Druthers customers park and how dangerous the situation is. So we went out and we're proposing getting rid of the parking. So I don't think that's a thing, something to be super worried about on Bridge Street anymore. I mean, the fire department agrees that it's a dangerous situation to let people park on Bridge Street. Traffic engineering agrees. That's my understanding of their position. Fast forward to December, the Surpass, the letters submitted on behalf of Surpass indicate that there's a danger to the Surpass business, and that the danger itself is a few things. That there's parking is also mentioned, but I think I've beaten parking to death here, about the fact that we don't want it and we don't think that's going to be a problem. But Surpass is also suggesting that there's a danger to their employees. If we remove parking on Bridge Street, then their employees will have to walk from Broadway to Bridge Street, which is essentially a block of walking. I understand their contention. They would lose parking and they would have to take that walk, but I don't know if you're able to pull up an overhead of 1053 Broadway on Google Maps. And if you're not, I can just describe the situation. But the Surpass employees park across a sidewalk at the end of Bridge Street. They're not utilizing legal parking spots. They park, they essentially take a left-hand turn over a sidewalk and park facing the National Grid fence. So I don't know that we're destroying, we're not looking to make it harder for Surpass's folks to get to work. But I tend to think that, I mean, from experience, if you see someone parked illegally and you see it in pretty good numbers, you're just going to start thinking to yourself that, hey, maybe this is an area that isn't patrolled real well. Maybe I mean, you see minor crime, but it sort of encourages other people to do the same thing. So I thought that a ban on parking on Bridge Street would be, the best way to do it. Another safety point, and I'm just trying to point to the viability of if we're destroying the viability of Surpass here. Another point would be, by putting this deck outside, we are bringing our people, our customers, our employees closer to where Surpass is operating its trucks. And when I first started out this presentation, I indicated that our staircase comes out 12 feet off of our building. It's been there for 6 years. So there's no sidewalk there. Surpass has never hit our staircase. Our planning boxes have been there since we opened. They come out an additional 3 feet. So 15 feet, they come off our building. Surpass has never hit our planters in the time that we've been there. So if you think about what we're trying to accomplish here, we're putting a 5-foot sidewalk with elevated curb between the Bridge Street and our deck. Our deck is being constructed on concrete piers, and the entire perimeter of our deck is going to have concrete bollards that are just before the deck to prevent something from making significant contact with the deck. So I know, I've been around the Surpass folks. They are a very safety conscious group. Their drivers are very well trained. I just don't see what we're doing not creating something safer. The other piece that Surpass in the December 6th letter is Surpass indicates that there's a danger of both air pollution and noise.
I'm so sorry, Chris, to interrupt, and I defer to Chair Berkeley. You will have an opportunity to rebut public comment, but right now I think this is the presentation portion.
Okay, sure.
Of your project, but Chair Berkeley, that's okay with you.
Okay, then I guess I was just trying to create the idea that we're not being detrimental to nearby properties. Okay, so I will move on.
Thank you, Mr. Martel. We appreciate your trying to be comprehensive, but if you could move on to the remaining 4 factors.
Absolutely. Could you, next slide, please? And the next one as well. Okay, let me walk you through some of the things that we've looked at doing other than this variance. Next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned before, if you take Broadway south, I believe it's south, it could be west. Next door to us is 1043 Broadway. We have tried to purchase that building since year 2. Our idea was that we'd provide off-street parking, take all deliveries there. The partners who own 1043 Broadway were involved in lengthy litigation. That litigation has just wrapped up, and it has been determined that the partner who walked away with the building does not wish to sell. We've also looked at constructing a rooftop deck. Essentially, with the rooftop deck on top of 1050 Broadway would require us to put in elevators, multiple staircases, and steel reinforce our entire building. It wasn't economically feasible. I sat down years ago with folks from NYS EDC, and we looked at druthers at purchasing the Surpass lot and Surpass relocating to the Port of Albany, and the funding just didn't work out. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we tried picnic tables in the street, and we just, it wasn't attractive to the customers. At the end of the day, when you come to a restaurant, you're hoping to leave your house, go to be surrounded by some ambiance, The middle of a public street with us dragging picnic tables into the middle and setting up umbrellas just it wasn't the draw that we were looking for. It just proved to be fairly unpopular. Next slide, please. Okay. This is essentially what I did here is why the variance is the only option to achieve the benefit sought. Having an elevated deck makes efficient service. We have manageable travel paths for servers. Servers can get back and forth to the bar, they can get back and forth to the kitchen. We don't need to add outdoor bars, and actually we don't have land outside to add outdoor bars, as everything in front of our building is a public right of way. The seating capacity, what we did is we took our outdoor seating numbers from Schenectady and Saratoga and tried to take a look at Albany and project what we might do with seating. And what you see below is essentially the deck as currently situated or as proposed, as seating capabilities of around 80 patrons. So what we walk you through turns means the number of times we would sit the outdoor seating on a given day. That equates to the number of people served. And then we took our projected revenue. We are, as I mentioned, about 25 to 30% off of our pre-pandemic revenue. The amount of seating here would get us within 10% of our pre-pandemic revenue. And I should point out that there is a lot of, we're not saying that we're going to be pre-pandemic plus another 80 people, or, take a look at the numbers, whatever we're going to be adding on a given day. What we're saying is we're so far below that our pre-pandemic guest visits that this would give us back some of that pre-pandemic level, but not get us to that level. So at this level of income, we'd be able to both pay for some of the costs of the deck and the sidewalk, and we'd get at least closer to profitability, but we'd still be about 10% off of pre-pandemic levels, which is 15 to 20% higher than we are right now. Next slide, please. So how is the requested variance not a substantial deviation? I wasn't exactly sure of how to measure how substantial an area variance is. The property that we're talking about getting a variance over really doesn't have another use. It's right in front of our building, in between, you've got maybe probably less than 25 feet of width, and it's kind of stuck in between Bridge Street and our property. So as I point out here, like if it's a easement sought versus total square footage of the public right of way, then it could be considered substantial. But if we're using an impact on the community standard, then I think the requested variance is quite insignificant. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, how would the requested variance impact the surrounding neighborhood through potential impacts as drainage, traffic, circulation, dust, noise, odor, public services, etc.? The short answer is I don't think there would be any impact. If any, as we suggested, I think traffic circulation would be greatly improved by removing the parking on Bridge Street. And I think that we'd make what is currently a quasi unsafe situation into a very, pedestrian friendly atmosphere. But I don't see any increased noises. We're not in a residential neighborhood. It's not like we close every night before, if we're open at 11 o'clock, it's surprising. So we're just not a late night spot. So I think the impact on the environment would be fairly minimal. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. So when I first presented this project, the question of whether or not this requested variance was self-created, I answered yes. And my rationale at the time was, I looked at something being self-created as, did I purchase the building and own the building subject to the current zoning requirements? And that's a yes, I did. But after working with counsel, I've determined that recent case law, or I say more recent case law, indicates that the courts are looking at whether or not something is self-created. They allow for conditions to occur, non-zoning conditions. Alicia Legland can probably speak to the case. She's on here as well, the name of the case. But essentially, what I've gleaned from the case is that prior to the pandemic, I would say that this was self-created. Post-pandemic, where you've got, prior I was thinking customers don't necessarily need to sit outside. They will sit inside if the space is nice enough. Now we're being faced with the issue of, a pandemic that just won't go away. And who knows how many variants we're going to have come through here and what it means for dining. But one thing is for sure, that outdoor dining is a necessity for restaurants now. So when I purchased the property, I wouldn't say that it was a necessity to have outdoor dining. It was just something that I would love to have. So because of that, and because of the court's willingness to treat events that occur after the purchase of something as kind of deflecting from the notion of something being self-created, and I would say that I don't have a self-created situation, but rather one that was created by the pandemic and the related restrictions and behavioral changes. I think that's the last slide that I have there.
Yeah, this slide was more a staff update to mention that this project fell in that unlisted action category, and so we would, encourage the board to entertain a motion to declare itself a lead agency under seeker. And we also wanted to bring to your attention that 2 additional variances have been requested for this project, which will be workshopped at the next meeting on Jan 12th. We will also have a public hearing for the same variances today. And lastly, I think Martha already covered this. Both these variances and the existing project have been referred to the Albany County Planning Board for their upcoming meeting in December 16th.
Thank you, Pulumi. Do we have any members of the public who want to speak for or against the project?
Yeah, we do have few members here. So just raise your hand and then we'll just go down the list.
Thank you. And before we do that, I'd like to read this council's comment from the chat, which is that bars and taverns are permitted in the zone as of right. And council then uses that to make an argument that no undesirable change to the community will occur as a result of the expansion.
And to specify that council is not me, Martha, it's brothers. It's someone else, it's an outside party.
Okay, so the first person that we have is Alicia Legland.
Thank you. And can you start the 3-minute timer for public comment, please?
Starting now.
Okay, great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so that was my comment in the chat. And I just wanted to supplement Chris's discussion of his first factor. So yes, my name is Alicia Legland. I'm here on behalf of Surpass with Chris tonight. So thank you for letting me speak. I just wanted to, as I said, supplement Chris's comments about the factors for the board to consider his variance request. So like I had put in the chat as he was discussing whether or not this would create an undesirable change to the neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood, or detriment to nearby properties. I just wanted to supplement his comments and say that bars and taverns are permitted as of right here. So it certainly aligns with the neighborhood and what the city has planned for the neighborhood. So another couple of things I just wanted to supplement with Chris's very thorough explanation of the project when he was discussing substantiality of the requested variance. I just wanted to kind of expand on that a little bit and make sure that it's understood that when looking at substantiality of a requested variance, the numbers can't be looked at in a vacuum. The key is the overall impact to the community, which, as Chris discussed, is minimal. Is minimal. So it's not just looking at the numbers of what the applicant wants to do versus what the code says is allowed. Just looking at that difference, that's not the end. The end is looking at that, but also looking at is there any negative impact, environmental impact, undesirable change to the community, all of those things which are just not present here needs to be taken into account as well. And like Chris said, there's currently between the stairs and the landing and the planters, there's about 15 feet off the building, whereas the deck is as proposed is only, or I believe 13 feet off the building. So it already exists in that width. They just want to extend the length of that structure to accommodate some tables and chairs, as Chris mentioned. So that's the substantiality piece. And I also wanted to supplement a little bit Chris's discussion of whether or not the difficulty was self-created. He did mention when my colleagues and I were discussing with Chris afterward and kind of explaining to him how, self-created, that term is considered and used in this context, and kind of, educating him on that. And he understands, he thought the standard was a little bit different than it is, but, our position is that it is not self-created. In the case that he mentioned was Citizens Savings Bank versus the Board of Zoning Appeals of the Village of Lansing. And there, basically the applicant had purchased a property that was operating as a restaurant, but then later on septic system issues were discovered and it was no longer able to operate as a restaurant.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that was 3 minutes. I'll put the next timer on the screen. I just had a small technical issue here. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, okay. No worries. Yep. So I just wanted to reiterate that is certainly not self-created. This is because of COVID and the absolute business need for outdoor dining now was not something that was ever considered when the property was purchased by Surpass. And, courts have found situations like that where issues have come up later that those difficulties were not self-created. So yeah, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Do we have any more comments for or against the project?
Yeah, we have one more person raising their hand here. I don't want to mispronounce anyone's name, so if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, I will start the timer.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
My name is Tyler Smith. I'm here with John Ducharme. I'm the general manager at Surpass Chemical Company. Safety of our employees, facilities, our community and environment is the single most important aspect of Surpass Chemical's business. We live and breathe it every single day. It permeates every decision we make and comes before profit. Surpass Chemical feels that allowing druthers to install an outdoor deck next to our chemical manufacturing and distribution business along a busy industrial city street that is used to transport our hazardous chemicals makes our community, environment, and our business less safe in a variety of ways. We have specifically outlined these concerns in several letters of opposition presented to the board. Everyone at Surpass wants to see their city thrive. Many of our employees not only work in Albany, but reside here as well. We understand that the city is trying to revitalize the warehouse district and turn it into a waterfront district with shops, restaurants, and apartments. These are positive changes to our community that we support, but let's not forget why zoning laws became part of planning and development in the first place. They were designed in part to prevent the construction of incompatible uses in close proximity to one another. They were designed to prevent residential housing next to manufacturing plants, for example. They were designed to prevent exactly what has happened here. Development of a restaurant, now with proposed outdoor unprotected seating on a deck next to a company that stores, blends, and transports hazardous chemicals. We are torn between a desire to help support the city's vision of our community with our duty to protect our business from added risks to our safety program. Surpass Chemical has had a good relationship with the city of Albany and all of its departments for over 100 years. It pains us to enter into litigation with the city over this issue. However, we feel we are being ignored and nobody is taking our concerns seriously. I would like to briefly speak on the issue of Surpass employee parking on Bridge Street. Our employees have been, for better or worse, parking across the sidewalks on the northern and southern side of Bridge Street for over 60 years. Our employees park this way for two reasons. The first is by not parking on the street itself, our vehicles are not in close proximity to the many trucks and tankers that go up and down the street all day. Secondly, it is because we outgrew our parking many years ago, and by parking in this manner, we take advantage of all available space in the area. Druthers' proposed solution to the parking problem at Bridge Street is to eliminate all parking on Bridge Street. We assume that also means our employee parking. There are approximately 25 spots along the sidewalks of Bridge Street being utilized by Surpass and Druthers patrons at night. If Druthers is granted its wish, it means all 25 of these spots will be gone in an area that is already limited parking. Can I respectfully ask for 2 more minutes?
No, Mr. Ducharme, but if you could please finish.
Okay, just for the record, that's Tyler Smith, the general manager with Surpass Chemical, who's sitting with me. I'm also.
My apologies, Mr. Smith.
No problem, no problem.
And
Sure.
I'm sure, and
Well,
Chair Berkeley knows this, so the board's rules of procedure allow that any speaker's time may be extended by majority vote of the board members in attendance.
all right, I'll just take John's time here. We find it incredibly confusing that Druthers' proposed solution to the parking problem is to eliminate and reduce a large number of parking spots in an area that clearly doesn't have enough parking even for us, let alone 200 restaurant patrons and neighboring businesses. Why would reducing the total number of spots help the situation? As you hear and discuss these variance requests, I humbly ask you to consider the following questions. Who in their right mind thinks it's a good idea to put a restaurant and brewery next to a level 4 Homeland Security site that stores, blends, and transports millions of pounds of hazardous chemicals? What would happen if we experience an act of terrorism and there are 60 people dining on Druthers' new deck? Why is it okay to prioritize Druthers' needs over Surpass? Why should we sacrifice so they can thrive? If Druthers is in such financial distress due to the pandemic, they feel they need a porch to survive, then how are they able to keep expanding and building new facilities throughout the Capital District? There was a parking problem on Bridge Street before Druthers even opened. And currently, I think everyone who's been down there agrees parking is a nightmare, and neither Druthers nor Surpass has enough legal parking for their employees and patrons. Does it make sense to add another 60 seats to the restaurant or 30 to 60 more parked cars to an area that can't handle what it already has? Does it make sense to put an ADA compliant entrance exit ramp next to a truck scale that is weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds of hazardous chemicals each day? If all parking is eliminated on Bridge Street, including Surpass employee parking, is it fair that Druthers delivery drivers can illegally park directly on the street that is supposed to have no parking? If a parking and traffic control study and sidewalk repairs were a requirement from the initial variance Druthers received, why haven't those requirements been enforced? It's been 6 years. Why hasn't the study been done? And lastly, if a Druthers patron who has had one too many walks off the deck into the road and gets run over by one of our trucks, whose responsibility will it be? Who's going to get sued? We know we sure will, but there could be others. Thank you.
Richard, you were muted.
Sorry about that. Do we have any further members of the public who would like to speak for or against the project?
We have a hand raised, Sam.
Hi, this is Alicia. Like, I think you might have just saw my hand from earlier.
Now, actually, this is John Ducharme. Can I speak?
You already gave your time to your manager, Mr. Ducharme.
Well, can I just state a couple things for the record that Alicia Legler, I believe she stated during her presentation that she was representing Surpass Chemical, and that is not the case. I represent Surpass Chemical. So I just want to be clear on that.
Thank you. She did make that mistake a few times.
Did I not say druthers?
No,
Oh, I'm very sorry.
that's okay. We understood.
Oh, my apologies.
Thank you. And now Druthers is allowed to bring a brief rebuttal, no more than 5 minutes at most, to the public comment.
If Druthers will be rebuttaling, can somebody just raise their hand just so I know who to unmute? Okay, there we go.
Hi, this is Alicia Legland on behalf of Druthers. I'm very sorry.
No, that's okay. I can do this, Alicia.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Sorry, I was just muted. I certainly understand where Tyler is coming from, but we are right next to Surpass Chemical. And if there's a way to, I think my biggest concern, just addressing the parking loss by his employees, is it's not only like illegal spots going across the sidewalk, but it's dangerously close for people who don't know what they're doing to see and park very close to that railroad track. And so I don't know, it just seems odd to restrict parking in front of Druthers and then allow it in front of Surpass, because I don't know that we're accomplishing anything. The reason I'm trying to get rid of parking on Bridge Street is because you're bringing massive trucks down the street, and I'd like to allow you the widest berth possible. And I think that accomplishes it. For some reason, we keep having conversations about this that I don't know. It's almost like right now we're proposing to move into the building, and we're not. We're already right there. So it's difficult to kind of marry the two ideas. I just want to also point out that right now, and I know we don't have an overview of the screen, but if the members of this board can just take a look. Right now, Surpass is turning off of Broadway onto Bridge Street. They're driving the length of Bridge Street and making a right onto Mill Street. Now, this has been the case for the last several months. So down Bridge Street, right onto Mill Street, or right into their yard. They go through the yard and then they approach the scales, okay? After that, they can either make a right or a left onto Bridge Street to clear their yard, okay? A left would take them by Druthers, a right would take them back to Mill Street. The reason I point this out is because if Surpass just wanted to avoid Druthers entirely, all it would need to do is drive a couple hundred yards further, let's even call it several hundred yards further, down Broadway, make a left on Tivoli Street, make a left on Mill Street, make a left into their yard, access the scales, and then take a right onto Bridge Street to clear the area. They would never go in front of Druthers, not one time. It's completely unnecessary. It's a convenience, but for the last several months, it has been this way. They've been operating, driving by Druthers, turning onto Mill Street, turning into their yard. So it can be accomplished by we're not asking them to build new infrastructure. We're not asking them to redo their entire lot. This is the way it's been working for the last several months. So while I completely understand that they want to operate safely, if Druthers is such a problem safety-wise for Surpass, I don't understand why you wouldn't completely avoid druthers by just going an extra couple hundred yards and using Tivoli Street. That's really it. That's what I'd like to suggest. We are there. I'd like to have a safer environment for everyone involved. There are things that Surpass can do. There are things that druthers can do. We've put forward a pretty comprehensive plan to make things safer. I'm sorry we couldn't reach an agreement. And with that, thank you. I'll yield.
Thank you.
And this is Alicia Legland again, and I just want to supplement what Chris just mentioned. Another thing is that a lot of the concerns that Surpass just mentioned regarding, what if something happens with the trucks, and what if something happens, with the chemicals or anything like that. These things, a lot of the concerns that they mentioned can occur. I mean, hopefully they never do, but can occur regardless of whether druthers patrons are sitting outside or are making their way into and out of the restaurant as it stands now. So it's not really changing or ameliorating those concerns. I just wanted to mention that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Legland. Are there any questions of the board?
Yes, I wanted the applicant to address the arguments about patrons breathing in the fumes from the area and the tanks, the large tank trucks. If there could be, I think you started to respond to that earlier, Chris, but in your rebuttal time, you didn't address that. So if you could address that, or you or Alicia.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I was bringing it up, the fumes, because it's referenced on page 8 of Mr. Ducharme's December 6th letter. Mr. Ducharme indicates that, and he essentially references 2 OSHA standards that apply to permissible exposure limits for diesel exhaust and noise. And then in the next sentence, without any analysis whatsoever, he says these regulations will, in all likelihood, be violated by the noise and exhaust created by persistent truck traffic. So normally, if I'm going to come to a conclusion, I'll provide a bit of analysis, maybe something like, hey, the trucks spit out this amount of diesel exhaust, and we're thinking of a person sitting there for a certain amount of time. I'm not an air quality engineer. So what I did is I reached out to an air quality engineer, and I just said, hey, I don't know anything about these standards. I know that, boy, city after city that I go to, they've got, sidewalk dining, like, it is a pretty common thing. I think, cafes on, you walk up and down Broadway in Saratoga, and it's dotted with places out there. So I asked him about the likelihood of diesel emission reaching an unhealthy level. And he said, his name is Charles Stead. He is a mechanical engineer who specializes in air quality. He notes that both nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxides mix, and he said in parens, diffuse rapidly. In an outdoor environment, problematic exposure is highly unlikely. I asked Charlie if there was some sort of monitor that I could get to put on the outside of our deck so we would know, and people would be aware if they're breathing in these noxious fumes. So they really don't make something for outdoor use. The closest he could get is something that he would use in like a car garage, like a diesel repair garage, something like that, where you've got, bay doors open, but there are engines going inside, or on construction sites where you've got diesel generators. He said, in closing, he said, it is also worth noting that nitrogen oxides from diesel exhaust is heavier than air and would expand out at ground level below breathable zones, especially outside. Carbon monoxide from gas engines is slightly lighter than air and would float but mix quickly with fresh air. Neither contaminant is much of a risk in an outdoor setting. So again, I'm not an air quality engineer. I reached out to one. That was his off-the-cuff response to what was set forth in the letter, and just using, I don't know, I guess just my prior experience in seeing folks, how many places have outdoor seating right along sidewalks on roadways. I mean, Broadway in Saratoga is a state truck route. There are plenty of diesel engines. With respect to noise, I don't even like, that's, it's hard to take that seriously. I don't know that a diesel truck, 10 to 30 diesel trucks passing druthers in a day would subject people to noise pollution that would violate an OSHA standard. I really don't know. I don't know what the decibels are, but I know that up and down Broadway in the summer in Saratoga, because I have a spot there, it's nothing but Harleys every 10 minutes and hitting a light and hitting their engines, and it's pretty loud. I've never heard that on Bridge Street and on Broadway. So I think that would be my initial reaction without a serious investigation of both the noise and fume issue.
Thank you, Mr. Martel. Are there any further questions from the board?
I had another quick question. This one is a less serious question. You said that during your presentation that the restaurant doesn't stay open past 11. Is that the case on Friday and Saturday also?
It is. Yes, we just have we're a dinner spot. We're not really a big party spot, so it's not by choice. I think we would stay open till midnight if we could, but it's just people arrive earlier and leave earlier as a result. It's just not a big sit around and power drink type space. I mean, we mostly have families coming in and young professional. It's just not a late night crowd.
Thank you. Any further questions from the board?
This is Martin. I've got a few questions related to the parking. One is a general question, I guess, more of a comment, let's say. A lot of the discussion back and forth about this variance request relates to parking. It's quite obvious the variance request is not for parking. It's for a deck that goes over a city right of way. So I'm curious how much ability the board has to take into consideration when we are making our decision, how off-site parking can influence our decision, given the fact the applicant and public comment has indicated there is a lot of illegal parking going on, including parking on sidewalks by prospective patrons and employees of adjacent businesses and Druthers itself. I am curious about the illegal parking situation and how much we can put on any party's shoulder about how people are parking in the area, given the fact that there is a limited amount of employee parking for and patron parking for those businesses on Bridge Street. So I think that's more of a comment, but it seems to me kind of striking that there's a lot of discussion about the parking when it is quite clear illegal parking is quite prevalent on that street, no matter who the party is. The second thing I wanted some clarity on is that a lot of the issues related to the expansion of the deck seem to relate to turn movements and visual impacts to the trucks themselves. So some more comments as to how that can be mitigated. And finally, we're talking about a number of the parking impacts seem to be felt during hours of operation of Druthers. And is the adjacent business a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday operation? And does that present the majority of concerns about how impactful truck traffic is, or illegal parking or parking on Bridge Street is? And could some of those issues be ameliorated by either segmenting parking for adjacent businesses and or restricting parking during the times where Surpass is in operation, that way not losing their employee parking or on-street parking and limiting parking impacts for Druthers? So I realize I threw a lot out there. Maybe it's easier to unpack those one at a time, but those are my thoughts.
Okay, so starting with the last one first, and the question about the hours of operation. I think that might be a pretty credible solution. We don't offer lunch right now. We just don't have not enough folks are back at work, and we do have the indoor dining only issue. So a lot of companies, our lunch used to essentially cater to the state workers and so on and so forth, and they'd get together in relative decent sized groups, and we're just not seeing that happen. That hasn't returned yet at most restaurants. So Surpass, my understanding is they begin at around 7 in the morning and they're done by about 4. That certainly could extend, and certain times of the year that could change. But last year when we had, actually 2 years ago, when we had tables in the street, we reached an agreement with Surpass, and I think we could start setting up at 4 o'clock. That's when they determined that Bridge Street was no longer 100% necessary, or they could live with the impediment to their business after 4 o'clock. So we don't have plans to open Albany for lunch anytime soon, and our lunch crowd isn't really that big. So there could be something where there's no parking. You know, we're busier essentially at 5 o'clock at night. We open at 4 right now. We get busy around 5. That lasts till around, you know, on most nights it's over by 8. On the weekends it's probably over by 10. So certainly there is a big difference, and that's why I think some of the parking situation has gone away. Since the pandemic has struck, we've been much less busy, and as a result, like the parking issues that we have had for the first 5 years of our relationship kind of went away. So there could be something to the idea of allowing Surpass to park there under certain hours. But I just want something. You mentioned also, how much can you put on someone's shoulders? Only reason I suggested a no parking, like explicit no parking signs with red painted sidewalks, is I really want people to get a sense when they pull in, there's no parking here. You know what I mean? Like I can't go out and police every time someone pulls in, and it's easier to just do, there's no parking here, kind of like at the airport, you know, just there's no parking here. But I don't have a cop to stand out there and tell people that they can't park. So I just thought no parking would be the easiest. Candidly, I didn't really think about the impact on, I'm just trying to make Surpass safer, you know, for our customer, you know, and vice versa, like a safer environment for everyone. I certainly don't want to be there the day someone gets hit by a truck or, so I don't know. I just thought no parking was the best solution to accomplish that. But, you know, sometimes what's good for us isn't going to be as good for them. So maybe there is a way to allow them to park during normal work hours, but make it explicit that Druthers customers cannot park there. Like after a certain time, have those same big signs in a painted red, but maybe it just kicks in at 4 p.m., you know, something like that. I'd certainly be open to that. I don't know if the fire department and traffic safety is open to that, but if it makes it easier for the folks at Surpass to operate, and also, you know, works at night so that we don't have people parking all over train tracks and stuff, I'm for it. That works for me. I might have
another thing to mention here too, Chris,
Yep.
pardon the interruption. But, you know, part of the reasoning behind your idea of eliminating parking was to kind of address these initial concerns about the narrowing of the street. And that was a very big concern that Surpass had brought up originally. So I think that was a big trigger for your ideas to do that as well.
Correct.
Thank you. And I appreciate the spirited discussion we've had about parking, despite the fact that it is outside of our jurisdictional ability to make any pronouncements on parking, but nonetheless, it was interesting to hear. So I'd like to ask a couple of questions of things that are within our jurisdiction. The first one is that you mentioned in your presentation, Mr. Martel, a concept that you called the community impact concept. Could you explain where that came from in the zoning law of the state of New York?
Oh, let's see. So what I did is I was researching various case law. Actually, I was researching law review articles that discussed the breakdown of these various standards. And it might have been a somewhat older article, but if you'd like, I could probably just find it and forward that to the board, you know, put it under public record, or that's where I got it. I essentially I didn't cite it in my PowerPoint, but it's essentially a law review article that discusses the New York State Court's treatment of these elements. And it references various case law. That's where I got the community impact standard. There was a numerical standard, and you know, I referenced, Alicia, if you know of what I'm talking about with this community standard, you're probably much better situated than I am to address that question.
Sure. So my understanding is that Chris here is getting at the fact that, you know, under New York case law, looking at the factor for substantiality of the requested variance, that it's not just the numbers. You know, you don't just look at the numbers in a vacuum saying this is what the code says, this is what the applicant is requesting, and the difference is that substantial or not. Yes, that difference is important, but it needs to be reviewed within the overall context of the holistic impact on the community, which, as Chris mentioned here, is quite minimal.
Thank you. Then if you would like to provide that law review article for the board, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
The second question that I had is, you addressed an issue which was also brought up by Bill Trudeau, which has to do with the narrowing of the street.
Mm-hmm.
Is the deck going to be extending onto the street?
No, and I'm not sure where, what gave Bill that that idea. I tried to show when I first began the presentation the picture of the existing curb that kind of, you got like 4 feet of a curb on the other side of our planters. It should follow, the sidewalk is going to follow that and hit that curb perfectly. So the sidewalk doesn't push into the street, the deck doesn't push into the street. It's just we're following the natural curvature of the street.
Thank you. And the bollards that you're intending to put up and the planters, do they extend into the street?
They do not. They're on the other side of, they're on the other side of the sidewalk, but they are right before, they essentially protect the this deck would be constructed on concrete piers. These bollards essentially protect the concrete piers. So the first thing that something would make contact with is these bollards, followed, if it was to get through the bollard, it would hit a concrete pier.
Thank you. Does traffic on the street currently drive on the area where the sidewalk will be?
No, and not unless they're parking at Druthers.
Yes, I'm talking about through traffic, but thank you for that amendment.
Yeah.
One of the requirements that the board has with regard to a variance is to grant the least possible variance if it is going to grant a variance. And I remember this somewhat from the previous hearing of this case, but could you briefly explain to the board what whether you had considered a smaller deck, either by width, that is distance out from the front of the building, or smaller, rather than 100 feet long, 75, 80, 85, whatever, rather than 20 feet deep, 10 feet deep. Could you explain why you decided not to propose a smaller deck, which would have ended up with a smaller variance?
Sure. So what I did is I calculate, at one point I was calculating a deck and I wasn't thinking about the sidewalk, and it was a much cheaper project. When you put the sidewalk in to take the safety measures, in fact, the sidewalk is almost twice the cost of the deck on this. It's about it's between 150 and 180 feet. So what I did is I used the data from Saratoga and Schenectady to figure out what we could expect for a return on our investment. What we would get in additional dining. And I'm talking even now, we're getting dining in both Schenectady and Saratoga. What are we doing there? How can we apply it, in an Albany context? So I figured out the debt service on the deck, plus what we'd be experiencing from increased dining. And I came up with the chart that's on slide 15 that essentially shows that we're a little bit over break even. I was just looking for a break even where I need to keep people coming into Druthers. I need to keep revenue coming in. The Albany location would approach. So I essentially, with the amount of space, I tried to keep 6 social distancing in play, even though it's outside. We do get people, even in our inside and outside, who, if a table is too close to them, they will make a request to move or just flat out refuse to eat at the restaurant. So the deck is a combination of return on investment, social distancing, and me getting upwards, getting close to that 80-person mark. It's not quite 80. I lost a bunch of seats when I've got to shorten this deck still to add the staircase. Let me just back up. in order to comply with the requests of the various city departments, the deck as you currently see it, I'll still need that level of, or that size easement, but it won't be all deck because I've got to do different things with the staircases at the end. I'm going to have to take a little bit of the deck off at the end in order to allow for the proper amount of visibility coming out of the Surpass parking lot. So essentially what I came up with is this. I provided that chart thinking that if I could make $65,000 a month in additional revenue, which is what I think I would get with the number of seats, with the proper distancing, with that many turns, that's where I would start to minimize that 25% loss that I'm experiencing right now, be able to make debt service, bring me closer to that break-even point. Because normally, I mean, if we're 15 is a great profit margin, we haven't been there in some time, but I'm at 25% loss. So if I can just get within 5% of break even, you know, it's sustainable for a while until hopefully behaviors change.
Thank you. And would it be fair if I paraphrase your answer for concision and state that the size of the deck is related to the size of the sidewalk? That is, the larger and more expensive the sidewalk, the larger you need to make the deck?
Yeah, I mean, because in order to pay it, yeah. I mean, the debt service on this is going to be, you know, it's over $200,000 to build a deck of this nature. And in order to bring in enough money to kind of reduce some of the loss that we're experiencing and pay for the deck over a period of years, like 5 years, that's what we're trying to do. Yeah. So there is certainly a relationship between the two. Yep.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from the board? Hearing none. I saw two comments from. Oh, go ahead, Martin.
Sorry. I just when it came to the sightlines comment from traffic engineering, could they be specific about preferred sightlines, or are there? I know that the deck goes to the absolute corner of the building. Is it necessary to go to the corner? Does it preserve some distance of the sight line if the deck was completely shifted to the north, I believe? And does that, I understand Chris's comment about the size. I certainly take that into consideration, but about the placement on the building, is there a reason for that? And does that alleviate some of traffic's concerns about the sight line for that alleyway?
So the reason that we didn't, well, two reasons that we didn't put the deck at the other end. One, I did need to keep an alcove for deliveries. And the best spot for that, I didn't want the alcove to be interfering with the Surpass property line. So I thought it was better to put something that was a fixed item, like the edge of our deck, down on that side of the building, and let trucks deal with the alcove, the 45-foot alcove that we have in between the end of the deck stairs going towards Broadway and the retaining wall. So I needed to keep parking somewhere for trucks to make their deliveries off the street. And that's where I chose to do it. And another thing was aesthetics. We've got 3 huge doors that we use there. Like they're just really big. That's how we bring equipment in and out. That's how we take some deliveries. So if I put the deck there, I don't have access to any of those doors any longer. So I do think we're going to have to reduce the length of the deck on the Surpass side so that they get the proper sight lines for safety purposes. In fact, I know that traffic is insisting on it, and it's not something that I considered at the time. So I'm sure that if this moves forward, that we would have to do that.
Thank you. Before we move on, I'd like to ask Sam and Palumi if you can save the chat and make it part of the record, please.
Yes,
Since,
we can do that.
As I'm sorry, I'm doing it now. Surpass has been putting comments into the chat, and I'd like to preserve them for the record. The board will not announce a decision as a result of this rehearing tonight. We will hold it over until we do our public hearing on the additional 2 variances that the applicant has sought, and so that decision will probably come all in the same public hearing in the future. So before we close the meeting, I would like to make a motion for consideration by the board that the BZA declares itself the lead agency for the purposes of seeker for this project. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of declaring the board as the lead agency for seeker for this project, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or wish further discussion? Motion carries. Thank you. And in that case, I believe we do not have any more business in front of us, Palumi and Sam.
No, that was the last item on the agenda for today.
Perfect. Then I thank you all, and I thank the applicants and the public for coming out, or I guess not coming out, going to your living room and coming to the meeting tonight. We appreciate your participation in the process of public government.
Could I add something?
Please.
CDRPC, shameless plug, CDRPC is offering our spring planning and zoning workshop for board members to obtain required credit hours. And that will be on April 29th. So that's a Friday. We'll have it all day. So you'll be able to obtain your full 8 hours if need be. So circle that on your calendar. We'll have a series of sessions, including a planning law and a planning ethics session if we're lucky and we can get the presenters. So circle that date on your calendar. And if people are interested in resources to get their hours, let me know and I can connect you.
Thank you, Martin. And thank you all. Have a good night. And I will see you in January.
Thank you, everyone.
Right.
Thank you for everyone. You have a good holiday season and
Yes. Bye-bye.
Enjoy every single holiday, and there's lots of them.
Okay.